Today I'm talking to Miranda Lowe, who's the Principal Curator of Invertebrate Zoology at the Natural History Museum. I've long been inspired by Miranda's work unearthing the stories about the important contribution that people of colour had made to natural history and science, and also the way she presents this research in so many different ways to so many different audiences. Recently, Miranda distilled some of her incredible knowledge in an article that she co-authored with Subhadra Das. The title of the article is Nature Read in Black and White, Decolonial Approaches to Interpreting Natural History Collections. You can hear more about Miranda's incredible work in this episode of The Wonder House. So today I'm very lucky to be joined by Dr. Miranda Lowe, who's the Principal Curator of Invertebrate Zoology at the Natural History Museum. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sushma. Yeah, it's been great to be here.
Cool. I have to ask you first of all, could you please explain what invertebrate zoology actually means? Because I'll be honest, I don't really know.
Well, it can be very vast in terms of museum collections, but what I look after are mainly wet preserves. So by that I mean things pickled or preserved in jars of marine invertebrates. So that includes collections of jellyfish, corals, crabs, lobsters, shrimps. I'm just sort of thinking, you name it. And really a lot of microscopical things that are really important in the world's oceans for indicators of good quality oceans, used in research for climate change. Planktonic samples collected on historic expeditions such as Challenger, the voyage that took place from around 1872 to 1876. And it was considered the birth of oceanographic science. So it was when scientists went on board ship, but they went armed with specific questions that they wanted to answer about the ocean. On that expedition alone, they discovered 4,500 types. But there is still material from that period of time where jars haven't been opened. And so there's a lot of potential to still discover new species.
How exciting. I mean, you've given us a wonderful overview of the kinds of material you get to work with, which is incredible. But what does your sort of day-to-day work involve? And I ask you that because a lot of people don't seem to actually know what curators do, and never mind curators who work with invertebrate zoology. Yeah. So just a brief overview of, what kind of work you do.
When you ask someone about a curator, they might, or more often think about handling art, cultural artefacts, such as in your role, I imagine.
Yeah, the stuff I look after.
But I would say, more of a natural sciences curator. So that involves, in terms of curatorial practice, is looking at the long-term preservation of animals, marine invertebrates, and within that long-term preservation you learn a lot about the chemistry of the fluid. So we preserve a lot of our material in either historically industrial methylated spirits, which is 80% in concentration, or more and more molecular grade alcohol for future practices for extracting DNA. We've got some of our jellyfish preserved in a weak solution of formaldehyde, because jellyfish would fragment if they were preserved in any kind of ethanol, so we keep them in formalin. And I do have dry corals as well. So I have a dry collection, which is not stored at South Kensington. It's in a separate facility because, as you know, for various collections, you need specific environmental conditions in terms of temperature and humidity. So for the alcohol specimens, we have storage facilities that are like chillers. And for the dry stuff, more, applicable to room temperature and things. But I allow a lot of access to this material. I work with a lot of university students, international scientists, do a little bit of my own research, not enough. So I do sometimes look down a microscope on the odd occasion. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I mean, I just wondered, how did you first become interested in natural history collections?
As a child, I had fascination with nature, in particular photographing nature. So as I've grown older, my family have bought me different kinds of cameras. And I just remember when they bought me my first digital camera and I said, oh, that's not a real camera. I'm used to the manual, being like really specific and setting up, things in your own way, and then getting into a digital camera. And then now, perhaps not even carrying my traditional camera so much with me. You've got everything on the phone
Absolutely,
now as well.
Yes.
And some really good, you can get some really good images on phones. But my mum was very very instrumental in, she loved visiting places of culture. She always urged my dad, to drive us to, for instance, the Natural History Museum and also the Horniman Museum as well. Was kind of our local museum because I've always lived in South London, so in the Balham Clapham area. Visiting Kew Gardens because my mum's a bit of a gardener. She loves flowers and things, so Kew Gardens was her place to go, so we always went. And visiting places further afield, such as Wakehurst Place. And we also, as a family, went to the Isle of Wight for many, many years on family holidays. So I think with my parents sort of coming from the Caribbean, they yearned for, let's say, a mini version, a British version, which is the Isle of Wight, that can be, a bit warmer than the mainland. Sometimes a bit warmer. And, a small island, essentially, like themselves coming from the Caribbean. So it was one to explore. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. In which case, I have to move on to what we're sort of talking about more broadly today. So at one point in your current role, the Natural History Museum, you've been there almost 20 years, which is phenomenal, actually. Yeah. Congratulations.
It's a bit over than 20 years now.
Oh, my goodness, okay.
Yeah.
Almost 30 years.
Yes, almost 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations, that's really an incredible achievement, actually.
Yeah.
So at what point in your career at this incredible institution with the most amazing collections did you begin to seek out, sort of uncover and start researching, what's actually a really integral role that was played by people of colour in the global acquisition of these kind of natural history collections?
Yeah, well, it was in 2007 when most museums and places of culture, that whole year, if I remember correctly, was commemorations of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade. So the Natural History Museum had brought together, through our community engagement team, various communities from outside, and mainly communities of colour, into the museum to explore natural history specimens and the archives there. And so they worked closely with those groups to explore the stories, which eventually were put into a document called Slavery in the Natural World. I remember being part of a couple of public events. With that being said, it then teased out of me, or brought out of me, a lot more of my ethnic origins, my culture, my own cultural stories that I'd heard from my parents and my own communities. It wasn't just about me being a curator at the Natural History Museum. It was something much more. And the document that was produced was a wonderful document. It was 10 chapters.
I read the lot, actually.
You did?
I did,
that's good.
Yeah.
You've had it for breakfast, tea, dinner. But, it's a fantastic document.
It's
but you know what the sad thing was? That after that year of events, and chapter 2, if I remember correctly, resonated with me because that's where I found, some of the baseline stories of these individuals of colour, these Indigenous peoples that I then wanted to explore more. But so that document then went online or went out into the internet.
It's still on the NHM website, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's only just returned in its entirety in October 2018, because before that, I was on a mini quest on and off to actually find various chapters. They weren't all together, although in more recent times I found out that there was one website, it was the Wilberforce Institute, that actually for that year was collating all the documents and reports from various institutions that had been compiled. And so it went into their web space, and I've only found that out recently.
That's cool.
It's better late than never.
Absolutely.
But so 2 years ago, there were some new members of staff that were working sort of in the digital area of the museum, dealing with the front-end websites. And I remember just having a coffee with them, talking about the museum. And I said, I've always wanted to find the extra chapters. A long story short, they actually found everything and pulled it all together, which was amazing after sort of, where are we now, 2019, nearly,
12 years
12 years or more. Yeah. And And so it was launched back on the museum's website, October 2018, because that's Black History Month in the UK. I must say it shouldn't just be a month, but, it's just all part of life, integrating and embedding all of this. But anyway, so it was that. And, it was really well received on Twitter. And as you say, everybody was saying, I've got these amazing, chapters and documents to be proud of. And that's what the museum should be. The NHM was ahead of the game in terms of, decolonisation becoming a thing now at the moment. We were doing it sort of, in 2007, and just think if the document was live and all together all those 12 years ago from the start, properly where we would be with these conversations, might be having different conversations. Certain practices may be more embedded now. Who knows? But we are where we are, and it's a good thing that it's out there and that people can take it on board now and do more work.
I agree. I mean, I read some of your work. I think it's your work on Graham Kwasi.
Oh, yes.
And also John Edmonston.
Yes,
I wonder, could you tell us a bit more about, how did you, discover, or rather, how did you first uncover some of these individuals, and how did you approach researching them?
Yeah, well, the baseline data, as it were, was embedded in slavery in the natural world. And just because of the way I work with my curatorial practice, I'd picked up certain bits of information over time and just pulled it all together. So there was a book that was published in 2004, 2005 called The Gilded Canopy, which is about our botanical ceiling panels in the Hinsey Hall. I think there's about 162 of those depicting all the plants that were instrumental in the British Empire and the trading, the trade routes, the economy. So I found out that one of the ceiling panels was named and dedicated to Graham Kwasi, who was a person of colour, an enslaved African that as a child had come from Ghana and was moved to Suriname, and there, when he grew up, learnt all the medicinal uses of various plants, and one in particular, which was named after him, which was called Kwasi Amara. It's been a journey, and I'm still finding out new things, so there'll be more than the paper that has published. I would love it to be a book about him and the impact that plant has had, the uses now, the extensive uses that it has in the pharmacology and the drug administration side of things. There's so much more to tease out of that story. How Carl Linnaeus approached, essentially those ideas from or the knowledge from Graham Kwasi was brought from Suriname to Sweden, and then published in a paper, and also samples of the plants brought back and pressed. And it's amazing for a person of colour to actually be acknowledged in that way. I'm saying at the moment that I haven't discovered too many of those stories, but I'm sure they're there, because in terms of talking about decolonisation, some people may not understand it fully yet and be a bit fearful of the topic, or not feel so empowered to investigate and things. So this kind of story pulling out that, well, actually, it's quite a good story to show that people of colour can be acknowledged. I mean, there's a lot, don't get me wrong, there's a lot where they're not acknowledged, sometimes on purpose, because at that time, those European explorers and naturalists and scientists sometimes wanted to just make a great name. Look what, I've explored these great areas, which, the ordinary man couldn't do. Come back, bring all those treasures and, all of that wealth, and look at me, aren't I great? It's for the privileged few at that point in time.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting, because when you read some of the documents, books published in, I'd say the late 18th and sort of early 19th century, it's very much I discovered this, I did that, I found this, and I did all the rest of it. But obviously, it would have been impossible for them to do any of that entirely on their own. It required a huge network of local people who could share knowledge under whatever circumstances, but it didn't just materialise out of nowhere. And I suppose for me, I think that's one of the most wonderful things about reading your work, actually, including blog posts. And it's been really exciting to see that you've been spreading these stories as widely as possible, because I suppose it's quite easy to keep it within quite a rarefied academic kind of sphere, and and, just discuss it amongst ourselves. But I've been really inspired by the way you share them. I think these stories are not just among your peers, but, younger children, podcasts, online lectures, you name it.
Yeah.
What's inspired you to do that?
Well, I don't want people after me to have to still be digging through archives to find sort of stories. I want it to be out there. And you know what? It's about demystifying certain practices within museums, because even, some friends and family that are still sort of thinking, oh, what's the museum hiding there? And I'm doing my best. Like, no, this is where you can find this information. Did you know museums actually have archives and libraries where you can find this stuff, and they're quite open to you? Sometimes museums and curators are their own worst enemy. They're not sometimes the best people at explaining what they do and being more open about it. So that's what I've found a route. I've navigated a route that I do a lot of outreach in schools and can explain things, and then hopefully they go and explain. So, oh, look, Mum and Dad, today at school we've had, this scientist or this curator for the Natural History Museum. She's doing this, this and this, and this is where we can find that. And perhaps come and look at an exhibition, because that's what ultimately I want to do, is to look again at some of the text and the panelling. I know that you've been doing that here as well.
Yes.
Because to every object or specimen, there are multiple narratives. And because a lot of the major museums in the UK are within cities, so within London, we have international visitors coming. They want to see stories, relate to stories about themselves, about their countries of origins, and also not what we want to show them, but what they might want to input as well, the knowledge about our cultural objects that we might not know, or might know when they impart their knowledge to, we might know where to go to find out a little bit more after they've given the seedlings of extra narrative about something.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing. I think it's always a two-way conversation.
Yes.
It's not just, hello, I have knowledge,
yes.
let me impart it to you. It's completely not like that. And I think a lot of people have this sort of idea that it's sort of this person sitting on high and giving culture or giving knowledge, when actually it's all about discussion. Yes, it's all about sharing knowledge. It's about developing new ideas and new ways of looking at something or interpreting something, and sharing that and building on that. So I'm very excited to hear that that's something you want to be doing. I mean, one thing, this is something I talked a little bit about with Subhadra, sort of asking, well, we have these incredible stories that you guys are working really hard on, and then you have science. Yeah. So how does this kind of research extend into scientific research? I mean, as someone who is a total non-scientist, are there any ways that one can influence the other or feed into each other, or are they really completely separate?
They don't have to be separate. Everything should be integrated. For instance, and when I say integrated, we have integrated collection management systems. And so there's room for stories of the collector alongside stories of those Indigenous people that they use their knowledge about the area and the time that these specimens were collected. Often within natural history collection narratives, they don't actually say that, within Suriname it was a Dutch colony and there was slavery. They just say, oh, well, this collector was there and collected and brought it back to Europe. It would be better to give it kind of like a more holistic, rounded view about the time. And yes, that happened. And it's all about facing up to the fact that happened. And a lot of the wealth of the UK and the other colonies have the wealth has been built upon the slave trade. There's nothing else to say that. Both you and I work at museums that, the founding collections are from Hans Sloane. His wife owned a plantation and slaves. That's the way it was. There's a certain amount of romance and what's the word, heroism about these
pioneering people.
Yeah, that's right. And
I think that's one of the things I really like about James Delbourgo's book.
Yes.
It really opened my eyes, and just the way he approached this individual, as you say, in this more holistic way. And giving him much broader context. It wasn't just, Hans Sloane sitting quietly, collecting magically, from all of these sort of extended threads he had spread out the world. it completely located him. It didn't pull any punches. It totally embedded him in the slave trade and other, pretty awful practices. But I think unless we are completely honest and open about that, I don't see how we can move forward and even start. And for me, I think that's the heart of any kind of work on decolonising, because something we've talked about just a few minutes ago. Some people are quite fearful of this term, and they may worry that they're not sure where it's going to lead. They don't know really what it means, and I think it's genuinely a fundamental part of it is just being open and honest. And it's whatever we create or talk about or build on or develop based on that. It just has, to my mind, more integrity.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you entirely. It is about being open and honest. And with that, then people won't be so fearful. They'll have a better understanding about what it means. A lot of what is happening in the decolonising arena are decolonial projects that are going on at the moment. Now, hopefully they're all interconnecting in some way and will come together. We're using the word holistically as well, to give people a better understanding, more information for visitors of the future to museums and looking at these objects and whatever, that we won't have to keep having this conversation. We'll be able to move forward. I think museums have an important part to play in bringing communities together. They're a hub for these conversations to happen.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, not just amongst ourselves, but wider and to feel free to have those conversations, and that you can disagree with someone, but be respectful in that arena as well. But as long as, you're armed with that information, I am, we have that conversation, showing the evidence, because, there are those that don't believe, just say, oh, you're just saying that. And to have more diversity on staff, so there's people like me and you as well. We come and we are probably, the stars of the show, if I dare I say, because we come with our cultural background that we grown up, and our parents and grandparents, all that information, and then we look after those objects, those specimens that relate to, and so we've got more of an insight in terms, than others, and it's all about imparting that knowledge, or those ways of knowledge, to our colleagues as well, and bringing them with us. We all need allies.
Absolutely, I completely agree. For me, it's all about working with the people in this sector more widely, because actually this is not just a passing fad. This is actually a fundamental reevaluation of what we do as museums and as museum workers, as curators, interpretation officers, whatever role you play within that sector. And I'm not sure what exactly the future holds, but I'm really excited about it, actually.
I was thinking the same thing, that we should be all excited about this, and not fearful, but excited. Yeah. It's interesting and good stuff that we're doing.
I completely agree, and I wonder if in generations past we would have had the freedom, the intellectual freedom to embark on the research we are doing, but also to share it as widely as we can, because obviously we have so many different types of media, whether it's Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is.
That is the thing. And now we do have Twitter that we can say, look, this is where it is. We can tell so many more people than just the visitors coming in, which is brilliant. And so it's in a sense doing marketing around our work.
It is. I know. Here we go. Curators as marketers.
Yeah, that's why not? We've got to be entrepreneurial about this, haven't we?
I agree. Well, we're not earning money as curators, it's. I just wondered, actually, just going back to that document, a lot of that work really, to me, reading it, I was really surprised to learn it was actually written in 2007, because a lot of the processes seem really quite revolutionary, not just revolutionary, but sort of really more ahead of its time.
Yeah, it really was. Exactly. Just like, wow, this thing is great.
So I'm curious, what were the outcomes from that project at the Natural History Museum? Did it have sort of visible outcomes, or did it change, more invisible things inside the museum?
You know what? I don't really know. Well, it obviously affected me, and I started, scribbling away, doing things, research in my spare time and things like that, because it was a side passion. It was something that I picked up and put down, that kind of thing, alongside my main general work. But now it's more and more becoming like bread and butter stuff, because people are like, "Wow, this is amazing!" And then the paper that I've published with Subhadra, it's called Nature Read in Black and White: Decolonial Approaches to Interpreting Natural History Collections. Everybody's been really excited and responsive about it and wanting us to come in and talk about it a lot more.
What led to that paper? Because, I mean, it blew me away. And I have to say, not many papers have the capacity to do that. And in a really positive way. So I've read it through at least 2 or 3 times now. And I'm getting something new from it every single time I do look at it. Because it really challenges how we approach any collections, not just Natural History Museum collections, because something that people who don't necessarily work with museum collections may not know is that the people acquiring the natural history collections were also acquiring those in the context of wider collections in particular regions or in multiple places around the world. And so you can't quite study them entirely in isolation. I mean, obviously you can if you want to, but actually you get a much richer insight into what their interests were when you look at their broader collections in a more holistic way. We got that word holistic again. What led to that? I mean, how did that come about?
Subhadra and I independently were looking at Twitter, and a chap called Danny Birchall, who works at the Welcome in digital engagement side of things, and he posed, I think it was just over 100 questions that were coming out through Twitter for provocations, conversations, that kind of thing. And I can't remember totally the specific wording of the question, but it was along the lines of, "Are natural history museums racist?" And it was through a conversation that I had with Jack Ashby, who used to be the manager at the Grant Museum, and Subhadra obviously works at UCL Museums, and she had spoken to Jack independently. And then Jack said, "Oh, I think you both," because we were concerned about that question and wanted to delve deeper and find answers if we could about it. And then he said, "Oh, you should all do a presentation together and write a paper on this at the Natural Sciences Collections Association, NATSCA." I get it right.
It's a bit of a mouthful, that
one. So they were due to have a conference. The theme was around provocative conversations within the museum world. Subhadra and I turned up there, and I just remember being slightly nervous, thinking, we've never spoken about this kind of topic before, decolonisation and racism, scientific racism, and being fully aware that also, I think I'm not sure if we were 2 of 3 people of colour that were at that conference. No, I think we were, most definitely. And the 2 of us took the stage. I think there was 1 more in the audience. So we're, kind of overly aware of that as well. And there was a live Twitter feed, going on. And Subhadra and I took to the stage, saying what we had to say. And I just remember being aware that you could hear a pin drop. Everybody, and I was sort of thinking, they're not liking it.
Well, it's either really good or really bad.
Yeah, that's exactly. And I was thinking, the worst, they're not liking this. And but they were listening, they were engaged. That was the thing, because afterwards, a round of applause. I was told that the Twitter feed had stopped while we were speaking, but then it just went alive, on fire, and then people in the audience tweeting, and it was really well received. That people said, we need to talk about this, have multiple conversations around it. And I would say it took the bravery of us at one conference to say it. But what we were also saying and have subsequently is that it need not just be us alone talking about this.
This is it, yes.
Because it is a very difficult space to occupy and talk about, especially if you're one of the very few within institutions that are of colour.
I agree.
It's just not easy.
I suppose when people talk about the sort of the labour that goes into it, that you're carrying, so you're visibly different anyway, and you bring your own baggage and your experience in the badging of the baggage of the institution, and
right.
Potentially other colleagues and their research as well, and then you raise the question that has been sort of quietly buried or tucked to one side for generations. And and it cannot be ignored anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
And
that's right.
Actually, people don't realise how much it takes to do that.
I think that's it. So that has sort of come out of this as well as talking about the paper and these topics. I found that I've had to talk more about me, which I haven't had. Not that I was hiding anything, just haven't had. I've just been getting on with my day job, doing my thing. And then because, well, I suppose it's more personal to me as well. So it's drawn out about, well, you don't know, put yourself in my shoes for once. Do you know what it's like, and and then other conversations coming out of it. And just very timely as well at the NHM, I'm part of, kind of one of the founding members to restart the diversity working group within the Natural History Museum.
Wow,
so
congratulations.
That's great. So that's happening, and we've got a lot of people on board there in many aspects, not just looking at more diversity in terms of ethnicity, but the whole gender, LGBTQ plus. So all of those issues are kind of, it's the decolonial aspect, I think, has also brought forward talking about other things as well that people didn't necessarily feel empowered to do so now. So we're having more conversations, and it can only do for good, in terms of the people that you have on boards within museums making decisions as well, because let's be honest, I can do as much work on this as possible, but if it's not going to feed up higher and for them to take it on board and to embed it across and then down below and all the other layers, and for other people to feel confident to start anything grassroots from the bottom up as well, to give them a sense of empowerment to do that, then, I hope this paper and this work and others will do go some way to supporting that within museums.
Completely agree. And it's one of the things that's been sort of, ticking around in my mind recently is how do you go about, yes, we're uncovering all these stories, we're working really hard to share them more widely, but unless you embed the idea of change into an organisation, it's cyclical. It'll just disappear.
Well,
and
that's it. And museums are slow to change.
Yeah, everyone talks about it. Yeah, no, it's true across the board. People talk about museums and they talk about glacial change.
Yes.
This is it's not it's new to anyone who works in a museum. So it'll be exciting to hear what happens through that network. Actually,
it's funny. It's just talking about museums slow to change. It's made me sort of think, with the issue of climate change, and I'm sort of embedded in that because of the collections that I work with, the coral collection, whatever. But I was just sort of thinking, I wish, in a sense, in terms of the dynamics within museums, there was climate change, that things were heating up and spreading faster, because that's where the climate change needs to happen, within the thoughts and processes of people within these institutions. So.
I'm not going to disagree because I don't. Just talking about the sort of emotional and sort of labour that goes into all of this, it probably won't be any surprise that you, I and Subhadra are all parts of Museum Detox. And I think for my work, I feel empowered being part of a group of other people of colour who work across the museum sector in totally different capacities. When I'm sitting in a meeting or I'm talking to other people about the kind of work I'm doing, I always feel I've got my own private cheerleaders sort of just behind me, cheering me on, and it makes such a huge difference.
It definitely does. When Sarah Wajid put the call out to me and a couple of others, I just remember sitting at my desk receiving this email about this gathering, this new group, for those that have been tired of being one of a few. And I just thought, gosh, this is probably what I've been looking for all my career. It was just amazing, that light bulb moment. And thinking, yes, I wonder how many people like me there are, not just as curators, but just all, in different roles within museums and places of culture. And just to meet them initially, because it was initially just a drink and a chat, and to be able, not that you don't love your own museum colleagues, but just sometimes there's just another connection. You need that other kind of support. And to just know that you don't have to fully explain sometimes the things, the way you feel and what you're going through within institutions by being part of Museum Detox. And it's just like, it's
deep
like coming
breath
home.
And relax. Exactly. Yes. When was that you first met? Which year was that? Do you
So that
remember?
was in May 2014.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, so
okay.
it's the 7th of May. I know that because we're in May at the moment, so of course the thing. So it was Wednesday, 7th of May, 2014.
Oh, that's incredible.
In a pub at the back of Oxford Street, which at the time was called the Dover Castle. It's changed its name.
Oh, there you go.
But
Wow.
it's still open as a pub.
Out of curiosity, how many people came to that first sort of meeting?
Probably about 15 of us or
Oh,
so.
okay, right.
Yeah, so it's a decent turnout.
That's not bad. That's more than I thought. I thought you were going to say maybe 4 or 5.
No. I've got that because I've got a kind of like the day after the night before email trail where everybody was saying, oh, thank you, this was just so inspiring, it was great to meet everyone, all that sort of like camaraderie type feeling. It's great, and it's gone on to do good things, and will continue, because as you say, that when you're in meetings and you're feeling a certain way, you just got to think of Museum Detox, or think of the next meetup that we're going to have, or know that you can, if there's something that's a burning issue on your mind, you need help, support, development of anything, or bouncing ideas off, you can just email that community, as it were, and get some support. Because
Absolutely.
you do realise it's, like we were talking, there's a lot of emotional labour that kind of goes with all of this, just being us in these institutions.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's one of the sad things that right now, hopefully this is changing and will continue to change, but a lot of that labour does seem to still fall on the people of colour. And so you're doing your everyday job, you're doing this additional work, which is deeply emotional, and really I'm finding it challenging. I'll be honest and say I do not find it easy, and it's sort of an extra burden of expectation, because I feel I'll fail in some way. Other BAME colleagues or future colleagues if I don't push this work now, and that really, it's one of the things that really plays on my mind, actually.
It is a pressure, and Detox there is to relieve that pressure. It's great that we've got that, and long may it last. It's all about sort of our colleagues as well, kind of shifting their expectations, not too much pressure on us, that it just has to be us, as I was saying earlier, about allies. And what we want also is for any future BAME curatorial staff, or anybody working in the museum sector, is to feel comfortable, because with the whole diversity and thing, there has to be an element of, well, you bring more diverse staff in if you can, but the inclusion bit is feeling comfortable once they're in, feeling comfortable, feeling empowered, feeling that they can talk to any kind of colleague about a particular thing, and feeling that their ideas will be heard, taken on board, or if they can't be, that there's an explanation of why not, those kind of things, not just dismissed.
I agree, actually. And I think the other aspect, I suppose, also slightly connected to Museum Detox, is that it's not just about diversity and representation. I think that's where, I think some people, they think about decolonisation and assume it's just about having more brown faces in the room, when it's just not. It's so much more fundamental than that. And I think some of the work that I see Museum Detox colleagues doing, like this article that you and Subhadra have recently published, it's about developing intellectual resilience, and also developing intellectual change. And I think that is more long-lasting than just having a bunch of brown faces in a room, which is obviously fundamentally very important.
But they then might not have any power to do
Precisely,
anything.
yes,
It's
absolutely.
just for the organisation, perhaps ticking a box, but that doesn't...
It doesn't embed change, and it doesn't empower change either.
It doesn't. So, I agree with what you said. I mean, I can't even add any more to that. I totally agree.
So I'm sort of curious to know, I mean, when people think about museums, often you just think about, well, not just, but you think about the material that's on display and the way it's presented, maybe exhibitions. So when it comes to decolonising a natural history collection, for you, what does that look like in a natural history museum? Not just the NHM, but actually in this type of museum, or among these types of collections?
It's the way, it's mainly, within the gallery, it's mainly down to the interpretation and the presentation of it. I have asked myself also, could I have expected any exhibition team to know what I know, or have a decolonial aspect to the galleries? And I'm sort of thinking, well, yes, I had the added benefit of being who I am with that cultural background, but it doesn't stop anybody from wanting to create an exhibition that meets the needs of international visitors of every sort. So yeah, so what am I trying to get at? What it would look like would be more embracing of having multiple layers of stories for people to connect with. And then people will turn around and say, "Oh, we've only got so much to put on a panel."
The word count.
But you know what it is? It's well, we've got a lot of digital technology now, so you can have like a text panel that you touch screen and things, and multiple layers with that, or signposting people to further information on the museum website. But you know what I'd really like is to connect, and maybe that's something we can work on at some point, is connecting, in terms of signposting, connecting, let's say, I don't know, the Hinsey Hall botanical ceiling panels, connecting to other institutions to visit, to add those your own layers of discovery to the story. Let's say we've got, I don't know, a coffee plant in the ceiling panel, and then you go and visit. Well, you visit our botany department to see another layer about Hans Sloane. You could come here to see any artefacts from countries where coffee was originally collected. You might go to the RHS. We've got the Chelsea Flower Show at the moment.
Oh, of course.
You know, all those kind of different. It'd be nice to have a little, or maybe it's like a little trail. But I don't want to put too much hard work on any of us doing it. But for people to, what's the word? The kind of motivating them to explore.
Absolutely.
Their own explore tour.
And also work together. Like you say, I mean, our two organisations are essentially sister organisations.
Yeah, well, that's right.
And obviously there is crossover between our collections because we used to be just one institution.
Well, one institution, that's
God, that would
right.
be fascinating, actually.
And also for the collectors, because I think you alluded to this earlier on, the collectors, some of them were not just scientists, but they also, although there were many that used Indigenous peoples to do illustrations and paintings.
And photographs.
And photography as well. But some of the collectors themselves were photographers and painters in different subject areas. So, for instance, I've had a lot of social historians come and visit me after they've been to the archives, and then they wanted to see the scientific collection of somebody who was not only a scientist, they were a dentist, and they did watercolours of landscapes, in the library archives as art, So again, that kind of rounded view of people.
And our collections.
And our collections. I think that would be a great way to decolonise. You'll be decolonising the archives, also the exhibitions, also the objects, and having layers of conversation around it, and people feeling that they're being listened to. There's just something to be said about getting money for these kind of projects, and then that's the end of that. That's essentially what happened with slavery in the natural world. And how still to keep people engaged with that. I suppose it's all about changing the style of funding as well.
Well, I think we need to change everything. No, it's an interesting one because, as you say, it's just this is currently normal. You get funding for, say, a 3-year project, and then after that, everyone's either looking for another job or looking for the next funding project. It's harder to sort of sustain. Well, there you go. Sustainability of the outcomes of these projects, and I think for me, I don't know. I love exhibitions, but my worry about exhibitions is that they have a short lifespan. I don't mean in terms of just the few months they're actually on display, but I mean in terms of people's imaginations, ideas they generate. I think too often they're just too transient, and I wish that there were some such superb exhibitions, and I just wish they could somehow leave a longer legacy. And I'm not sure exactly what that legacy looks like.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, because I was thinking that as well. I'm not sure either. Thinking caps on.
Yes, absolutely. It's one for the future.
Yeah, one for the future, yeah.
This is quite specific, especially for students, but as we know, it's getting harder and harder to find paid employment in the museum sector, and especially so with, special, curators of very particular specialisms, like for me or for you. I wondered, do you have any advice, especially for BAME students who might want to work with scientific collections in a museum? Do you have any advice for them, however general or specific?
Yes, I would. I wish I could say, don't bother volunteering.
Yes, unpaid volunteering.
And that is divisive in itself. Not everybody can afford to do unpaid volunteering to get an experience and the training. I wish that, and it's happening in some places, but at the time when I started all those years ago, I wasn't a specialist in zoology. I'd come from a molecular genetics background.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And so I had temporary jobs. I even sort of worked for the government. I worked in it was MAF at the time, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Foods, but it's probably a branch that would be called the Food Standards Agency at the time. And then I worked at St George's Hospital in a medical school. All those kind of things within science, just trying to get my foothold in and everything. But at the time when I was employed at the museum, they were looking for a trainee assistant curator. And there are a few, because we have a lot of younger members within Detox that have come through. What's it, Sockle?
Oh, yes.
But that, it's a diversity program, and again, it's limited on funding. It's a diversity program with a branch outside of the museum, but to feed museum with BAME, individuals. But I think nothing beats than actually that those kind of schemes should be embedded within, and not even necessarily. I know people might have mixed views on it, but not necessarily a specific BAME
diversity scheme.
Just that museums are employing or have training schemes that you can be trained, and then, or apprenticeships that you can be trained in-house and sample many different departments within a museum, and then there would be an offer of a job. Because when I came in, essentially it was, I came into marine invertebrates. I was trained up. I had a degree, but I was trained in curatorial practice. There wasn't, or if there was, it was just starting out, museum studies course and things like that. But I was trained because museums have all those in-house experts. And those experts now, and they're few and far between, they're getting older generation. But I do think that some of those people that are at the top of their career forget that some of them, even before my time, came into the museum sector straight out of school. Straight out of school.
I can't even imagine.
17, 18. And one of my previous managers started at the museum at 17. There's another lady who started when she was 18, and she just wrote a letter to the museum. I know times have changed, but there needs to be room for bringing in people to train. Otherwise, as we say, you lose that, the expertise. It's more difficult for regional museums, and I'm always sort of looking at that aspect of things because they're sort of fed their money or run by local councils, and local councils have all these difficult decisions to make in terms of housing, budgets on healthcare and all the rest of it. And often, unfortunately, the specialists the curators in those museums are the first to go, and then they're looking at, moving collections out of those museums and sometimes shutting those museums or putting collections in storage. And you do need people with the knowledge about museums and particular collections, because historically they're important, regionally specific collections are important to those communities, and I see them as community hubs. We're talking a lot about health and well-being. Those hubs, like libraries, are there for people to come together, engage in conversations, to learn their history, to learn other people's history, and to appreciate everybody, in terms of outside community engagement, in terms of living alongside one another as well, for a start.
I think also this is slightly different but sort of associated as well, but also learning how to look at something and interpret it.
Yes,
because whatever
you're right.
you look at in your day-to-day life, there is much more to it than just a simple, straightforward image, whether it's advertising or some artwork or anything in between, whatever it is you're looking at. It's important to deconstruct something and not just to take something or even someone at face value.
On face value,
And I think museums are uniquely placed to help encourage that new type of knowledge, not new, but, this kind of visual knowledge, this visual language as well, and sort of also bringing a wider context in terms of how people interact with one another and the multiple histories and the objects which represent some of those anyway.
And everybody has the power within them to do that as well. I think sometimes I know that the buildings are great and kind of imposing, but, it's encouraging people to step through those doors, that it's not, we're doing outreach there, but it's, that they have the power within them to do this critical thinking, not to, of
don't just
objects.
take it. Don't just
that's
take
right.
what somebody
to have
said.
a sense
You
of
just think about
inquiry
it.
about something.
That was me, Sushma Jansari, in conversation with Miranda Lowe, Principal Curator of Invertebrate Zoology at the Natural History Museum. For me, one of the key points in this episode is the importance of in-depth collection-based research over the long term to draw out stories about people of colour who've made such important contributions to natural history and science over the centuries. One of the examples Miranda talks about is Graham Kwasi, who's otherwise little known outside very specialist fields of study. But, as she mentions, Kwasi's legacy is in full public view on the ceiling of the Natural History Museum's main hall. It's something I'd never noticed before. In the blurb of this episode, I include a link to Miranda's blog post about Graham Kwasi and also a link to the 2007 Natural History Museum's Slavery in the Natural World project, which includes information about many more people of colour represented in the museum's collections and some of their displays. This episode was produced by Nick Harris and me, Sushma Jansari. If you liked what you heard, do subscribe through the podcatcher of your choice and leave a review. There will be a new episode next week, but if you can't wait, follow the show at The Wonder House.